Sister framed me. My family believed her and disowned me, but years she ditched her child and ran. Now they. OP, 26F, 24 at the time, was on the cusp of completing her physical therapy degree, a milestone that represented years of effort, sacrifice, and ambition. To support herself through school, she worked part-time at a rehabilitation center, balancing the grueling hours of study with hands-on experience. Her focus was singular: build a future where she could be independent, successful, and finally move out of her parents' house. However, her plans for a peaceful and focused final year were disrupted when her older sister, Amber, 29F, returned home. Amber, freshly divorced and struggling to support her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, moved back into their childhood home with an air of defeat that quickly soured into resentment. At first, Opie welcomed her sister's return, empathizing with her struggles and offering support in every way she could. She babysat Lily whenever Amber needed time for job interviews, helped polish her resume, and even went so far as to create an online dating profile for her, an attempt to inject some hope back into her sister's life. But no amount of goodwill seemed to be enough. The bitterness crept in slowly. At first, it was just small remarks, Amber rolling her eyes when Opie mentioned an upcoming exam, a sarcastic "must be nice," whenever she talked about her future career plans. But it escalated. One evening, Opie overheard Amber on the phone, her voice thick with resentment as she muttered, "She's always been Mom and Dad's favorite, but not for long." The words sent a chill down Opie's spine. There was something sinister in Amber's tone, something possessive and vindictive, as if she had declared war without Opie even realizing it. The red flags begin. The shifts in Amber's behavior became impossible to ignore. She claimed she was spending hours each day looking for work, yet she never seemed to have any real leads. Whenever Opie asked how the job hunt was going, Amber would deflect, snapping that it was harder for single moms, and that Opie would never understand because everything had always come easy for her. But Opie had her doubts. Amber would leave the house for hours, only to return with nothing to show for it. No emails, no callbacks, not even a stack of applications. She started dressing up more, wearing makeup and perfume just to go to the library or a supposed interview. It didn't add up. Then came the snooping. Opie walked into their father's office one afternoon to find Amber rummaging through his desk. The moment Amber spotted her, she slammed the drawer shut and forced a smile. "Just looking for a pen," she said casually. But the tension in her voice betrayed her. Opie didn't press further, but unease settled in her gut. A few days later, she found Amber in her own room, standing near her nightstand. The drawer was slightly open, and her wallet, a place she always kept some cash for emergencies, was askew. When Amber saw her enter, she straightened quickly and smoothed out her dress, acting as if nothing had happened. "I was just looking for my hair tie," she said, holding up a scrunchie that clearly belonged to Opie. It was a small lie. A lazy lie. And then the real violation came. The missing money. Opie began to notice that money was disappearing from her wallet. At first, she thought she had just miscounted. A few dollars here, $10 there, it was easy to overlook. But soon, it became undeniable. One morning, before heading to work, she counted $60 in her wallet. That evening, there was only $40. She didn't want to believe it was Amber. She told herself she must have spent it and forgotten. Maybe she dropped it. Maybe she misplaced it. But deep down, she knew. There was only one person who had access to her things. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Opie took a small step. She left her wallet in her nightstand and memorized the exact amount inside, $45. The next day, only $25 remained. The betrayal was sharp and cutting. Amber hadn't even been subtle. She had just taken it, assuming Opie wouldn't notice or wouldn't dare confront her. But Opie was done pretending. The house, once a place of family and familiarity, had turned into a battleground of silent accusations and stolen trust. Amber's resentment had festered into something ugly, something that made her feel entitled to take from Opie without remorse. Opie had spent years working toward a future that now felt suffocated by her sister's bitterness and manipulation. What hurt the most wasn't just the money, it was the knowledge that Amber, her own sister, was willing to undermine her, to sneak and steal and lie, all while acting like Opie was the villain. And as Opie prepared to confront her, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The weekend that changed everything started with what seemed like a simple request. Amber, looking more stressed than usual, asked Opie if she could babysit Lily for 2 days. She claimed she had to travel out of town for a set of crucial job interviews. Opie, despite her growing distrust, agreed without hesitation. She had always loved Lily and wanted to help, even if something about Amber's sudden urgency felt off. But she told herself she was overthinking. Maybe Amber had finally taken the job search seriously. Maybe things were turning around. Amber left early Saturday morning, a rushed hug to Lily, a curt nod to Opie, and she was gone. No further details about where she was going, no mention of which companies she was meeting with. Just vague answers that didn't sit right. But Opie pushed it aside. For 2 days, she took care of Lily, cooking her favorite meals, playing games, and helping with her schoolwork. Even as unease lingered in the back of her mind, Opie convinced herself that she was just being paranoid. Amber returned late Sunday evening, stepping into the house with an air of triumph that didn't match someone who had just endured back-to-back interviews. Opie immediately noticed the brand-new designer purse slung over her shoulder and the gleaming high-end shoes on her feet. The moment Amber caught Opie's gaze, her lips curled into a smirk, quick, almost imperceptible, but there. Opie's stomach twisted. "So, how did the interviews go?" Opie asked, forcing her voice to remain neutral. Amber barely looked at her. "Fine," she said, brushing past, already heading to her room. Opie stared after her. Something was wrong. "Did you get any offers?" she pressed, stepping closer. Amber turned, her expression tightening. "It's none of your business." The tension was thick, and Opie felt it creeping up her spine. But before she could push any further, Amber disappeared into her room, shutting the door behind her with an air of finality. Something felt off. Something was wrong. But Opie never could have predicted what was about to happen. The next morning, Opie was jolted awake by the sound of her parents screaming. Not arguing, screaming. Her mother's voice, shrill and panicked, cut through the house. How could she do this to us? Her father's booming voice followed. She stole from us. Our retirement. It's gone, she took it all. Opie's heart slammed against her ribs. She scrambled out of bed, barely pausing to throw on a hoodie before rushing downstairs. Her parents were in the living room, their faces red with fury, her mother clutching a stack of printed papers in her shaking hands. Amber stood in the corner, arms crossed, lips pressed together in a tight line, watching. "What's going on?" Opie asked, breathless. Her mother turned on her, eyes filled with betrayal. "How could you do this to us?" Opie's stomach dropped. "Do what?" Her father stormed forward, shoving the papers into her hands. $55,000. Gone. You drained our retirement savings. The words hit Opie like a sledgehammer. "What? I didn't." She looked down at the papers, hands trembling. Her breath caught. There, in black and white, were bank transfers. Large sums of money funneled directly from her parents' account to an account under her name. Opie shook her head violently. This isn't real. I never did this." Her mother threw another stack of papers at her. Text messages. Dozens of them, printed out, showing a conversation where Opie had confessed to needing the money. Messages saying she felt entitled to it, that she deserved something after all the years of living in their house, that they should be grateful she didn't take more. Tears pricked at Opie's eyes. Her voice cracked. "I didn't write these. I never sent these messages." Amber let out a small scoff. "So you're saying Mom and Dad just made this up?" Opie turned to her, desperation rising. "Amber, you know I didn't do this." Amber tilted her head, eyes glinting with something cruel. "Then how do you explain the transfers? The messages?" I don't know. But they're fake." Opie's voice was shaking now. "Mom, Dad, please, you have to check the real bank statement. Call the bank. I swear, I didn't do this." Her mother's face was hard, unreadable. Her father clenched his jaw. "We don't need to check anything. We have the proof right here." "But it's not proof." Opie's breath was coming in fast, too fast, her vision swimming. "It's fake. Someone must have done this on purpose." Amber let out a sharp laugh. "Oh please. Who else could have done it?" Opie's hands clenched. She felt like the walls were closing in. "You." The room went deathly silent. Amber arched a brow, feigning offense. "Me? Are you serious?" She turned to their parents, shaking her head. "This is pathetic. She gets caught, and instead of taking responsibility, she tries to pin it on me." She let out a bitter chuckle. "She's always thought she was better than me. But now? Now we all see the truth." Opie turned back to her parents, pleading. "Please, just check. If you just look at your real statements, you'll see the transfers never happened." Her father's face was stone. "Enough. We're not going to let you stand here and lie to us." Opie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her mother's voice wavered, but her eyes were firm. "We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us?" She swallowed hard. "You need to leave." The words didn't register at first. "What?" "You have 2 hours to pack your things," her father said coldly. "After that, I don't want to see you in this house again." Opie felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. She looked at them, then at Amber, whose lips curled into the faintest smirk. "You can't be serious," Opie whispered. Her father's expression darkened. "You're lucky we're not calling the police." Opie's body went numb. Her hands shook as she took a step back, her mind screaming at her to fight, to beg, to do something. But the looks on their faces told her it was useless. She was already guilty in their eyes. She was already gone. An hour later, Opie stood outside, suitcase in hand, staring at the house she had once called home. The front door slammed shut behind her. She turned her head slightly, catching sight of Amber through the window. Amber raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. And then she turned away. The realization settled into Opie's chest, cold and suffocating. She had lost everything. Not because of a mistake. Not because of some misunderstanding. But because Amber had planned it. Every step. And she had won. Opie stood outside her childhood home, suitcase in hand, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing her chest. The night air was cold, biting against her skin, but it wasn't the weather that left her shivering. It was the realization that she had nowhere to go. Her entire life had been stolen from her in a single morning. Her parents, the people who had raised her, had thrown her out like trash. Her sister, Amber, had framed her, fabricated evidence, and watched with a satisfied smirk as Opie was humiliated and disowned. And the worst part? No one had questioned it. No one had even hesitated to believe she was a thief. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a cruel reminder of how quickly her world had turned against her. The messages came in one after another, a flood of hate. "How could you do this to your own parents? Thief. You always thought you were better than everyone else, but now we all know who you really are. You're disgusting." Every message hit like a slap. Amber hadn't just convinced their parents, she had gone further. By the time Opie had reached the bus stop, she realized Amber had spun her web even wider. Opie's aunts, uncles, and cousins had all been fed the same lies. The entire extended family had turned on her. Her phone calls went unanswered. Her texts were ignored. By the time she reached out to her parents, desperate for one last attempt to clear her name, she found out she had been blocked. On everything: phone, email, social media. It was like she had never existed. Her hands clenched around her phone as a wave of helplessness crashed over her. She had nothing. No home, no family, no money, and nowhere to go. But then, a name came to her mind: Zoe. Zoe had been Opie's best friend since childhood, the one person who had always been by her side. If there was anyone she could turn to, it was her. With trembling fingers, Opie called her, praying she would pick up. Zoe answered on the first ring. Up. The moment Opie heard her voice, the dam broke. Her breath hitched, her throat closed up, and she struggled to speak. "Zoe, I need help." Zoe didn't hesitate. "Where are you?" 30 minutes later, Zoe pulled up in her parents' car. Opie barely had time to register the worried expression on her friend's face before she was pulled into a tight hug. Zoe's parents didn't ask questions. They didn't demand explanations. They just told Opie she could stay with them as long as she needed. Opie had never felt so grateful. But gratitude didn't erase the shame. The first few nights, Opie barely slept. She lay awake in the unfamiliar guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened over and over. Her parents had believed Amber so easily. Her extended family had turned against her without hesitation. Her name had been dragged through the mud. And the worst part? She was powerless to stop it. The messages didn't stop. Every day, a new wave of hate flooded her phone. Amber had spread the story far and wide. The narrative had already been written. Opie was the ungrateful daughter who had stolen from her own parents and then played the victim. People she had known for years sent her cruel words, condemning her, shaming her. "We all knew you were selfish, but this is evil. Your poor parents. You disgust me. You're dead to us." Each message chipped away at her, leaving her raw and hollow. She wanted to scream, to cry, to fight back. But what could she do? Amber had planned this perfectly. And Opie had no way to prove her innocence. The only person who believed her was her grandmother. Unlike the rest of the family, her grandma hadn't been so quick to cast judgment. One night, Opie's phone lit up with a message that made her breath catch. "Grandma, I know you didn't do this. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." The relief was instant and overwhelming. Someone believed her. Her grandmother, too old to drive, couldn't offer her a place to stay. But she did what she could. Every week, a small bag of groceries would appear on Zoe's doorstep, left anonymously so no one else in the family would suspect. It wasn't much, a loaf of bread, some canned goods, a few apples, but it was everything to Opie. Because it meant she wasn't completely alone. But even with Zoe's family and her grandmother's quiet support, life was brutal. Opie threw herself into work, picking up extra shifts at the rehab center, anything to keep herself afloat. Her schedule was relentless. She barely ate. She barely slept. Every dollar she earned went toward finishing her degree, her only chance at reclaiming her future. Most nights, she went to bed hungry, stomach twisting with emptiness. She rationed her food, stretching every meal as far as it would go. She drank water to quiet the gnawing hunger. In just a few months, she lost 15 pounds. Her clothes started hanging off her frame. Her body ached from exhaustion. But she refused to break. She refused to give Amber the satisfaction of seeing her fail. When she finally finished her degree, she wanted to cry, not out of joy but out of sheer exhaustion. She had done it. Against all odds, against every obstacle Amber had thrown her way, she had finished. And then, almost miraculously, she landed a full-time job at a sports medicine clinic. For the first time in months, she had something that felt like hope. She could finally start rebuilding. But no amount of success could erase the pain of what she had lost. Her parents hadn't reached out. Her family still believed she was a thief. Amber was still out there, living her life, completely unscathed. And Opie? She had clawed her way back from the brink, alone. But she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 1 month after Opie was kicked out, Amber vanished. At first, it wasn't obvious. She told their parents she had landed a fantastic job opportunity in another state, something high-paying, something prestigious, something she just couldn't turn down. It had happened so fast, she claimed. They wanted her to start immediately. She would need time to settle in, to find a good place before she could bring Lily. She promised she would send for her daughter soon. Her parents, still blindly devoted to Amber despite everything, accepted it without question. Amber packed her bags, said a quick, distracted goodbye to Lily, and walked out the door. And then nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. And Amber's excuses kept coming. Work is crazy right now. I'm still looking for the right school for her. I just need a little more time. But time stretched endlessly, and Lily remained. Her parents waited. They made excuses for her. They reassured Lily that her mother loved her, that she was just busy, that she would be back for her soon. But as weeks turned into months, even they couldn't ignore the truth. Amber had no intention of coming back. She had planned this all along. She had gotten rid of Opie, eliminated the only person who would have questioned her. She had manipulated their parents into believing her lies, ensuring they would defend her at all costs. And now they were trapped. Because she had abandoned Lily, leaving their aging, exhausted parents to raise a child they weren't prepared for. Opie, watching from the outside, saw it all unravel. Her parents were struggling. They had spent their entire lives planning for a quiet retirement. They weren't supposed to be taking care of a 7-year-old, juggling school drop-offs, homework, meals, and doctor's appointments. They weren't supposed to be the ones getting up in the middle of the night when Lily had nightmares, the ones dealing with the tantrums and the endless energy of a child who missed her mother. They weren't ready, and it was breaking them. Opie saw it in the way her mother's hair grayed faster, in the dark circles under her father's eyes. She saw it in the way their voices grew weary, how the frustration bled into their words when they spoke to each other. They were overwhelmed. And worst of all, they knew they had been used. But they were too ashamed to admit it. Amber had outplayed them, just as she had outplayed Opie. And now, Lily was the one suffering the most. She had been left behind, discarded like an afterthought. She clung to the idea that her mother would come back for her, but with every passing day, that hope withered. Her bright, childish energy dulled. She stopped asking when Amber was coming back. Stopped bringing up the phone calls that never happened, the video chats that never came. She just stopped. And Opie? She watched it all from the outside, the pain twisting inside her. She could have warned them. She would have warned them, if they hadn't thrown her away. But now they had no one else. And Opie was left with the cruelest thought of all. Did they finally realize what they had done? Did they finally understand what it meant to trust Amber? Did they finally regret choosing her? Graduation day should have been a celebration, a moment of triumph after years of sacrifice and struggle. Opie had worked herself to the bone, balancing sleepless nights, relentless shifts, and the constant weight of betrayal on her shoulders. But as she stood in her cap and gown, looking out at the sea of cheering families, she felt the absence of her own like a wound that had never quite healed. There were no proud parents in the audience, no father wiping away tears, no mother beaming with pride. Amber, of course, was nowhere to be found. But Opie wasn't alone. In the crowd, her grandma sat front and center, smiling with all the warmth Opie had been denied for so long. Beside her, Zoe's family cheered the loudest, waving a homemade sign with Opie's name on it. They had become her family. The ones who had picked her up when she had nothing, who had housed her, fed her, believed in her when no one else did. So when Opie walked across the stage, diploma in hand, she didn't let herself feel the sting of who wasn't there. She had made it. Without them, life slowly began to rebuild itself after that. Opie secured a good job at a sports medicine clinic, one that finally allowed her to breathe, to live, rather than just survive. She saved every penny, scraping together enough to buy a used car, an old thing with a dented bumper and a questionable radio, but it was hers. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward. And then, unexpectedly, Ryan entered her life. He had been one of her patients, a former athlete recovering from an injury. From the start, he was different, kind, patient, genuine. He had asked her out at the end of his treatment, and for the first time in years, Opie allowed herself to say yes. Ryan didn't just become her boyfriend. He became her safe place. He saw the broken parts of her, the scars left behind by her family's betrayal, and never once turned away. He encouraged her, supported her, made her feel like she deserved happiness. And he was the one who finally pushed her to face the one part of her past she had been avoiding. Lily. It had been so long since Opie had seen her niece. Not since that awful day, when Amber had stood smirking in the doorway as Opie was thrown out like garbage. Not since Amber had abandoned her child, leaving their aging parents to struggle under a burden they hadn't been prepared for. But Opie hadn't forgotten. She had watched from the sidelines, seen Lily slowly fade under the weight of broken promises. And she had wanted to reach out. She had ached to reach out. But the fear always stopped her. Would Lily hate her? Would she blame her for leaving? Would her parents even allow her to see her? Ryan, however, didn't let her run from it any longer. You love her, he had told Opie one evening, voice gentle but firm. And she loves you. That doesn't just go away. With his encouragement, and her grandmother's secret help, Opie finally took the step she had been too afraid to take. A meeting was arranged. At a small ice cream shop, away from the house, away from her parent. Neutral ground. Opie sat at a booth, hands trembling, stomach twisting with nerves. She had no idea what to expect. Then, the bell above the door chimed. And there she was. Lily. Bigger now, older, but still the same little girl Opie had once held in her arms, the same child she had read bedtime stories to, the same niece she had loved. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lily's eyes widened, and she ran. Straight into Opie's arms. The force nearly knocked the breath out of her, but Opie didn't care. She held on to Lily like she would never let go again. Tears spilled down her cheeks as Lily's small hands clung to her like she was afraid Opie might disappear again. I missed you, Lily whispered against her shoulder. Opie's throat tightened. She pressed a kiss to Lily's hair, voice shaking. I missed you too, baby. And in that moment, Opie knew. She couldn't undo the past. She couldn't change what had been taken from her. But she could choose the future. And Lily would always, always be a part of it. Even if Opie never spoke to her parents again. Opie hesitated before sending the text to her father. It was short, to the point, a proposal for a visitation schedule for Lily. Nothing more. No small talk. No questions about how he was doing. Just business. She didn't expect much. Maybe a reluctant agreement. Maybe a dismissive, we'll think about it. What she didn't expect was his response. Dad, come to dinner. Let's talk. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her first instinct was to say no. But then she thought of Lily. If she wanted to be in her niece's life, She had to at least attempt some form of communication with her parent, even if it was just long enough to make a plan and get out. So she said yes. Dinner felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Her parents greeted her at the door like nothing had happened, smiling, acting as if she had just been away on a long trip instead of thrown out, disowned, and smeared as a criminal. Her mother set the table with a warmth that made OP's stomach turn. Her father talked about his latest golf game, completely ignoring the fact that this was the first time they had seen her in over a year. Not a single mention of the hell they had put her through. Not a single apology. Instead, after the plates were cleared, her mother leaned forward with a sigh. "We were thinking," she said, voice casual, "maybe you could take Lily on weekends? Just to give us a break. She loves spending time with you, and well, we're getting older." Opie stared at her. She felt the anger rise, hot and sharp. "So that's what this is?" she asked, her voice dangerously even. "You didn't want to apologize. You just wanted me to help you." Her father shifted in his chair. "That's not what we're saying." "No," Opie shot back. "Because it sure sounds like it. You threw me out. You accused me of stealing from you without even checking the bank. You let Amber destroy my life. And now that she's abandoned you, you suddenly need me?" Silence. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "We made a mistake. A mistake. That's all they would admit to. Not a betrayal. Not cruelty. Not throwing their own daughter into the street without a shred of proof. Just a mistake." Opie exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "I'll take Lily on weekends," she said, standing. "But don't mistake that for forgiveness. I'll be in her life, not yours." Her father's expression darkened. "Don't be like this." But Opie was already walking away. She wasn't playing their game anymore. Weeks later, the truth exploded. Her cousin Megan called her, voice breathless with shock. "Opie," she said. "Amber's friend, you remember Kelsey? She leaked everything. Everything." Amber's lies, carefully woven and perfectly executed, had been exposed. Screenshot. Text. Proof. Amber had photoshopped fake bank transfers to frame Opie. Fake text messages where Opie confessed to stealing the money. Planned to dump Lily on their parents all along. Bragged about how easy it had been to make their parents believe her. Megan sent Opie the screenshot. There it was, in Amber's own words. "God, my parents are stupid. I had Opie gone in under an hour. They didn't even check the bank. Lily's their problem now. I'm done." The entire family saw it. Her aunts, her uncles, the cousins who had sent Opie hate messages, the people who had shunned her. And they realized, too late, that they had turned their backs on the wrong person. Her phone started ringing. Her parents, again and again. She didn't answer. She let them sit in the silence they had forced her into for years. But eventually she agreed to meet them. Not alone. Ryan was with her, solid, steady, a silent force at her side as they sat across from her parents at a restaurant. They looked hollow. Her mother's eyes were red. Her father had aged 10 years. "We're sorry," her mother whispered. Opie didn't flinch. She had waited so long to hear those words. But now they meant nothing. "We were victims too," her father added, as if that excused everything. "We didn't know." Opie's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You had a choice. I didn't." She let them feel the weight of that. "You didn't even check the bank before throwing me away. You didn't think twice before believing Amber. You didn't just make a mistake. You chose to destroy me." Her father swallowed, looking away. "We regret it." "I don't care," Opie said flatly. "You regret being fooled. Not how you treated me." Her mother sniffled. "But we're family." "No," Opie said, rising from her seat. "We're not." She would continue seeing Lily. But her parents? They had already lost her. Months later, Ryan proposed. It was simple, private, beautiful, and Opie knew immediately. Her parents would not be at the wedding. She sent them a letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. They had never truly apologized. They had only regretted being tricked, not how they had treated her. She was only inviting people who had loved and supported her. Their response was immediate and vicious. "Mom, you're being so cruel. Dad, how could you do this to us?" She ignored them. But on the wedding day they showed up anyway. With Amber. They weren't allowed inside, security made sure of that. But her father, always the stubborn one, tried to sneak in. He didn't get far. Ryan's football-playing cousins tackled him to the ground before he could even make it to the ceremony. He was dragged out in front of everyone, humiliated, furious. But Opie? She walked down the aisle with her head high, without him. Because this was her life. And they weren't part of it anymore. The final blow came after the wedding. Her parents, in a last act of pettiness, tried to take away her visitation rights with Lily. Opie and Ryan shut that down immediately. They hired a lawyer. The case was over before it even began. Her parents had no legal say over Lily. Opie kept seeing her. And her parents? They started showing up unannounced, knocking at the door, begging to talk. She installed security cameras. She banned unexpected visits. They had made their choice years ago. Now she was making hers. Amber stayed in Florida, barely calling Lily once a month. Lily no longer expected her mother to come back. But she had Opie. And Opie had built something new. A strong marriage with Ryan. A successful career. A loving relationship with Lily. Supportive in-laws and a grandmother who had never abandoned her. Her parents had chosen pride over their daughter. And Opie? She had chosen happiness. Without them,